Welcome to Chess with Link. Today we're talking about using your rook as the hero of your chess game. We're going to take a look at the end of 4 games from high-level chess players of the last 100 years or so. And what I'd like you to do is follow along as I set up the situation for you and try to help you find the path to checkmate without revealing every single move immediately. Let's begin with this game, where the legendary Nimzowitsch is playing as black against Swiderski as white. How do you think Swiderski is going to win this game in the next few moves? You may occasionally want to pause the video, because I'll give a little bit of time, and then I'll dive into my explanation. White brings queen to f3, and black defends their f7 pawn. From here, Swiderski puts the queen on g3, threatening checkmate, that rook proving less effective. A pawn comes to the defense, blocking the queen from the checkmate square. But Swiderski decides to sacrifice his queen against Nimzowitsch, and then wins very soon from here. Which pieces do you see which are capable of causing the most trouble here? Do you remember which piece we're trying to use as the hero of our games this week? If you recall the rook and the plan that white had a few turns ago, the knight is still guarding g7, so the rook can come on over here and put the king in check. And the player on the black side, in this case Nimzowitsch, must move the king to get out of check, because nothing is threatening the rook except the king, and the king cannot capture due to the knight. From here, there is a predictable pattern. Do you see how we could support our rook that is currently on g7 in a different way? Perhaps in a way that would let us move it to h7 to deliver check again. If we bring our rook up to c7, this threatens checkmate. It's here that Nimzowitsch resigned, because the rooks are guarding one another. And it is possible for our g-rook to go to h7, which would force the king to move to g8, at which point our c-rook steps onto g7, delivering checkmate. Black does get a turn before we can enact this plan. But what is black going to do? If either rook comes up to the 7th rank, or the knight tries to interfere in that support line, the c7 rook is free to just clean up those squares, because it always has support from the g7 rook. Rooks working together can be incredibly powerful. For a more recent example of this, I have here, and we'll link down below, the Ivanchuk versus Aronian game from just a few years ago, in which a similar situation developed. So similar that the knight is even guarding g7 again. See if you can predict the next move which Vasily Ivanchuk made against Levon Aronian. Aronian captures with the pawn. How could that same pattern that we saw lead to victory? Aronian resigned here, knowing that Ivanchuk could make this checkmate happen because of the knight and the rooks connected. See if you can find the path to the checkmate. For our next game, we have Howard Staunton playing as white and losing to Elijah Williams. What do you think black should do? White has just moved the rook over to a8, clearly hoping to get into a position where that pin can turn into a skewer. Hoping to be able to actually capture a guarding piece. How can we take advantage of that now as black? Hopefully you've noticed that we could put our opponent's king in check, forcing him to either step closer to our rook or into opposition. Now, we're playing against Howard Staunton, so he's probably not going to step into opposition unless we force him to, because he knows that our rook plus our king can be a deadly combination. But where else could we threaten the king? And is there any way that we could completely lock that king into a square? Don't forget about the rook in the A file. We don't want to put anything in the third rank unless we're willing to have it pinned or trade. But if we put our opponent in check, like I said, he's not going to step into opposition. He knows that that king is doomed if it moves to g1. So his only hope is to move to e1. At this point, how could we protect our rook? Should we move it? Or do we remember one of those goals that we talked about a little while ago, about forcing the king into a spot where he will not be able to escape because he's stuck between two of our knight's moves? In this case, Elijah Williams played knight to f3, guarding the rook, threatening the king, and because of the rook's threat lines, the king was forced to step to f1. The knight is now guarding on either side. Our king guards 2 of the 3 squares. Now, what do we do to make checkmate happen? Be careful about giving the king an escape. Notice how our king supports certain squares. Even though he can't step into them, he still supports them. Hopefully you saw the rook steps into f2, supported by the king, and importantly, still guarding e2, that square that would have been abandoned if the rook had stepped up to d1. We've got an oddly familiar situation. We have a opponent's king in opposition with our king, but we cannot use our rook to checkmate because then our rook would lose support. The rook is currently supported by the king. What could we do to turn this into a checkmate? I'm not going to reveal the answer. The answer is in the study linked down below. But I want you to try to remember the position we saw in the previous game. The way that the king, then rook, and the knight worked together. And see if you can make that checkmate happen. I'm going to leave you with one more puzzle. And this is just a fun game. After supporting the rook so much for those last couple of games, I thought it might be fun to hunt down the rook. It's white to move on this board, and white should be able to force checkmate in about 18 turns. That's a lot of turns, and you're sure to make a mistake along the way. But see if you can find the pattern. See if you can find the path. See if you can force the pin or the skewer to make sure that you get a win as white and not merely a draw. Or take this as a challenge playing as black and see if you can survive at least 20 turns or force a draw.